All right, we're about to get into our last conversation for the hour, and we're talking Matters Health, doing a small clinic on diabetes. And we're joined in studio by Dr. Shilpa Mulki. She's a diabetologist, also a consultant physician from Lions Sight First Eye Hospital. Let's welcome her to studio. Good morning, Shilpa.
Hi, Mariam. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to see you.
Pleasure.
Let's begin the day with a quote. Janet will give you a quote, and then you tell us your interpretation of it if it speaks to you.
The quote is attributed to the painter, sculptor, and architect of Renaissance, Michelangelo. And he once said, "The danger is not that we aim too high and miss, but that we aim too low and hit."
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's changed how diabetes has been viewed over the years with research, and it reflects well on how we've started picking up and making diagnosis at an earlier stage rather than at a later stage when complications have already set in. That's what it speaks to me. And it means volumes because it reflects into a person's day-to-day living and their quality of life. That hits home. I'm going to use that someday.
Oh, yeah?
Thank you.
That's a really good interpretation of it because it speaks to real time.
It does.
What it means to stop, aiming high and missing.
Yes.
Or that we need to aim high and make sure that we hit
Yes.
and not keep aiming low.
Right.
Okay.
Because then there's a comfort. You know, you aim low and you hit the target. It's like, okay.
You're like, yeah, I can do it.
Right. We've been speaking over the last few months about non-communicable diseases, and diabetes is one that we had spoken in our small forums about, but we've not been able to speak about on the show. I think it's really important to do, a small clinic here. So it's a very interactive hour, the next one. Our number is 0719-038-858. If you have any questions around diabetes for Dr. Shilpa, but I'll just begin by asking her the prevalence and how much of it is diagnosed in Kenya. How many people who have diabetes know that they have it?
50%.
Wow.
1 out of 2 people who are living with diabetes in Kenya know that they have diabetes. The other 50% don't. Measures to up screening are put in place, but they're still not enough. And this again reflects on the quote that you just mentioned. I wish we could pick up earlier at even the lower thresholds so that we can put in measures to prevent it from becoming a full-fledged, from pre-diabetes to diabetes. It is not impossible. It's very, very feasible.
Okay.
Prevalence stands around somewhere around 4 to 6% as per research done almost 8 to 10 years ago.
Okay.
Yes.
So do you think that was 8 to 10 years ago? Do you see a rise in cases from your own anecdotal knowledge in recent years?
Yes, I do. Urbanization has taken a hit on all of us. We're eating more processed foods than we used to eat natural foods. So yes, it is going to make an impact. And also the fact that more of us are going for diagnostics and even wellness checks, it has made an impact and given us early diagnosis. It has its sweet and bitter sides, but it's important to go both ways. You don't wait for the symptoms to come in and then you get yourself diagnosed. You go for your wellness checks and you get yourself diagnosed early. Like I said, it's bitter and sweet. Oh, no, I got it. But yeah, I got it early. It's a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about the test, right? But it's something you've alluded to because the World Health Organization says diabetes deaths are rising fastest in Africa compared to the rest of the world. Maybe, again, you can just expound on that a little bit. You talked about urbanization. Are there any other factors? Then, yeah, we'll go into blood sugar tests. But first start with that. That's pretty daunting data. Yeah.
It is. There are 2 perspectives to it. One, we are actually collecting data now. So we're beginning to diagnose in ourselves and understand that it's also non-communicable diseases. And on the other hand, because our complications are getting diagnosed at a later stage when there's irreversibility to it, it's why we have more deaths and that we're picking up on. And even based on genetics, as sub-Saharan Africa, we are more predisposed to microvascular complications, so kidney disease. Not everybody gets managed for their kidney disease very quickly. Dialysis centers are far and wide between. It's a need that we need to up, right? We need to fill that gap to be able to manage these patients better. So yes, we are going to report more deaths, but it can be turned into something good, wherein we fill the gaps now. Okay, there's a gap, let's start filling it now.
Right. Yeah. I didn't know that we're more predisposed to, what did you call them?
Microvascular.
Microvascular.
So,
what are those diseases?
So kidney-related diseases, nerve-related diseases, and eye-related diseases. We, as a genetic population, are more predisposed to micro rather than macro. We're of late also predisposed to macro because macro is the bigger vessels, heart disease, stroke, and gangrene. If you've heard of the blockage of vessels in the arteries and leads to amputations. But that now is because of urbanization and the kind of food we eat. We used to eat much better in the 80s and in the 70s because we didn't have that much access to processed food, and processed food was much more expensive at that point in time. Right now, processed food is cheaper. So we're all reaching out to it. Cholesterol levels are peaking. Heart disease and stroke are becoming more common as well. But genetically, microvascular complications were more common in our population than in sub-Saharan Africa.
Actually, what are processed foods?
Anything that's not natural. Fruits, rice are mostly unprocessed. The brown rice and all of that. And when it is actually not processed into brown rice, if you know what I mean.
No, I don't. I always get confused with, so what's processed, what's not for processed.
Yeah.
I'm eating chicken.
Is that processed?
Kuku imetoka pale, I've made it here. Is it processed? Is it not processed? I'm eating ugali. At what point is this ugali, unga processed?
Right.
At what point is it not processed?
I would say that again, the closer you get it from the mill and from the primary source, the less processed it is. The stuff that you get in the supermarkets is predominantly processed food because the whiter the better.
That's
Broiler the better. And then now, because we're becoming health conscious, the browner the better. So people are actually allegedly adding colors to the processed stuff to make it look more brown, so that it looks more palatable to health enthusiasts.
Okay.
So it's
And why is that processed bad?
so that it looks more white and it
No,
looks.
what's wrong with eating processed?
What's wrong with eating it processed? To process food takes away a lot of its nutritional value. For example, rice. If I'm to process rice to make it from brown, all rice is brown. You remove the husk and it becomes white rice. Husk is very healthy. Husk contains a lot of nutrients, micronutrients and macronutrients. The minute we remove the husk, we also remove fiber. Fiber is what makes us feel full. It also allows the gastrointestinal system to work better and for things to be in motion, pun intended.
Yes.
But
for number two to be easier.
To put it.
So, but then when we remove the husk, we process it, and then we put it through a mill to make it look a little whiter. Some people add chemicals to bleach the rice so that it looks whiter. There are a few studies that have reported that the bleaching process also, when it gets into our systems, it kills off the cells of the beta cells of the pancreas that actually produce the insulin that we need. And also, because it's a chemical, it will cause insulin resistance. It will cause inflammation, insulin resistance. And even the insulin that you have is not going to work.
Right. So the closer to source, your food should be as close to source as possible.
Yep.
Something that has undergone minimal processing, if at all.
Yes.
So I'm thinking ugali, meaning the rice, the maize is milled and that's it, right?
Yes.
That's what you eat. And that ugali is heavy and it's hard to make, but that's what's good for you.
It's not the super tastiest.
Yeah, it's not the super tastiest.
But yeah, because now we've been forcing ourselves in the house. So like, just close your eyes and remember, it's good for the body, it's good for the body, it's good for the body. But yeah, I think that conversation is becoming widespread, but it's hard to always get it right. So I wonder where you strike that balance.
Because, Doc, processing of food is a global industry. What percentage of the world's population actually has access to unprocessed food?
Wow. It used to be us.
Yes.
Exactly. That's a good point, because we had less of urbanization. The whole industry wasn't here as much. So that's why we also had lesser incidence of diabetes in the past. Now, not so much. I cannot tell you a percentage.
Right.
I would say just maybe 10, 15%, 30% of us can actually afford good, healthy.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even say organic because, organic, but truly organic. It would be quite difficult for us to source, not even just the expense. Where are we going to go find fruits that are not laden with pesticides, etc.?
Yeah.
So it's just about managing with what we have.
Oh gosh.
And also keeping
So
happy.
what I'm driving at here is that you are, depending on where you are, if you're in urban areas, you're more likely to actually consume a lot of processed food because of just the nature of things. And the justification for the world to move process is very many things, including preservation, right? So what is the balance then? Because we are saying that I have less and less access to unprocessed food. I have greater access to processed food. So here I am. Majority of the food that I have access to is processed. What's the balance? What else can I do? How can I bring the process? The missing nutrients.
Fruits and vegetables. Again, not speaking for a person living with diabetes, but speaking for wellness in general. Fruits and vegetables, more of fruits and vegetables on your plate, less of processed carbohydrates on your plate. And if the carbohydrates have to be processed, it could be even in the natural form. Sweet potatoes, they're not all that bad if you balance them out in the right way. Speaking to a nutritionist can give you that guidance as to what exactly your plate should look like. And you go to a finance expert and a finance advisor for managing your money. Why don't you take time out to meet your nutritionist once in a year and ask, okay, at this point in time, what do I need and how do I manage my day-to-day? Because it's your body. You don't just pick from the supermarket. You go and talk to somebody about it.
How accessible is that?
Yeah,
though?
I was going to say, it's a privilege of very few Kenyans to be able to afford a nutritionist. To even have healthcare that is free, not, So I think that's quite a big problem.
We do have plenty of nutritionists around, and nutritionists don't have to get fancy about the food that they advise as well. It's not about shakes and meal replacements at all. It's just about them being able to advise. But yeah, you're right. And that is a gap that needs to be filled. And that's where empowerment of our healthcare providers makes a big difference.
It does,
yes,
from even
right.
community health. But let's get into diabetes now, specifically. In Kiswahili, it's called kisukari. So our immediate association of diabetes is sugar, but just explain what diabetes is, the types, and then you also mentioned pre-diabetes, which is something people may not be familiar with.
Okay, so diabetes is a condition where there are high blood sugars that are circulating, and the sugars in the blood cause damage to various organs. I'm keeping this as metaphorical as possible. There are largely 4 types of diabetes, and then there are others also. Type 1 and type 2 diabetes are most common. Type 1 diabetes is when there is absolutely no insulin in the body, and type 2 diabetes is when there's insulin resistance. I explain this to persons living with diabetes as the following. You have a street, and you have rioters on the street. The rioters are the sugar. Ideally, the police is supposed to come in, clear out the street of the rioters and put them away into wherever they're supposed to belong, right? In type 1 diabetes, there are absolutely no police on the street. So there's damage that goes through and through. It is havoc. So the only way to fix it and the only way to live in a person living with diabetes, type 1 diabetes, is they're dependent on insulin. They need insulin to survive, just as you and I need water and air and food to survive. So in addition, insulin, that's given externally and through injections only. Type 2 diabetes is where there's insulin resistance. The police are corrupt. They don't put away all the blood sugars into where they're supposed to be stored, and so they don't clear it out as well as they should. So they wreak havoc. The sugar wreaks havoc as well. That's type 2 diabetes. So those are the major types. And more common than type 1 is type 2. Can happen at any age, even in a 9-year-old, even in an 82-year-old. And then there's gestational diabetes. That's diabetes that comes up in pregnancy. And then there are secondary causes of diabetes. If there are hormonal changes in the body, for example, an excessive steroid, this induces high sugars, and therefore that is a secondary diabetes. There's a type 5 diabetes that's coming up. That is also interesting. It's been declared an entity from this year onwards. So there is a working group to understand how malnourishment in a younger age group, especially when you talk about war-laden, drought and famine-laden countries, and the younger population has faced malnourishment at a younger age. This affects the pancreas, and at an older age they develop diabetes, even if they're lean.
Oh, wow.
And another one could still, so that's type 5. Does it look like it could still evolve to trying to understand that there's other types that could come up? Is that a possibility?
There is this one's not been declared, but it has been proposed as a type 3 diabetes. That's Alzheimer's associated with diabetes. There is something called MODY, or genetics-based diabetes, the maturity onset of diabetes in young. There are many types, but the main types that we need to know about are type 2 and type 1. Pre-diabetes is when the blood sugars are just about high, predisposing us to diabetes. For example, genetics, a first-degree family member who has diabetes, pregnancy during diabetes, and then after the pregnancy is over, the sugars go back to normal. This person's also predisposed to diabetes.
Okay.
Obesity.
So when you
is a
say
big risk
first-degree family member, that's a parent, a sibling, who else?
Yes.
Just
Uncle,
that.
aunt.
Uncle, aunt,
Yes.
okay.
Grandparent.
Right, grandparent also.
Okay.
So these are direct blood relatives, which is most of us.
Yeah.
And then genetically,
Yeah.
South Asians, Africans, and the Latina population are genetically predisposed to diabetes.
Why are we genetically predisposed to so many things?
Ancestral gifts? We just accept them and we deal with it. We take them as blessings.
Ancestral gifts. It's interesting. Like, remember when we had the fibroids
Yes,
conversation?
and it was black women are
it's-
genetically predisposed to fibroids.
How do
Yeah.
you get to being diabetic? And let me just ask this. So, for example, if one of my kids likes candy and donuts and whatever it is, and it's sweet, and they're eating them every so often, and we're trying to balance it, at what point do we start saying you're on the way to becoming diabetic? Or even a grown-up, maybe my eating patterns changed. But yeah, how does somebody become a diabetic?
We don't call them diabetic anymore.
Okay.
It's appropriation. We say person living with diabetes because you can't be driven by your disease. You can't be named by your disease. So we say person living with, so PWDs. Right from a very young age, it's good to train, advocate for our kids, prevent them from eating candy. But then, of course, we grew up with candy, most of us. And I still eat my candy on a daily basis. But telling them and empowering them with the knowledge. And there's no turning point at which you say, okay, this much candy is going to give you diabetes, because everybody's predisposition is different. But the importance is telling them, okay, if you've got to eat the candy, you've got to make sure you work it off and make sure that you balance it out with much more healthier food in a larger portion than having your candy. Having candy, yes, diabetes, your teeth get spoiled, and all of that, but then you need to balance it out with eating healthier food and getting more physically active. That's another thing that's lacking in the younger generation. I know how inactive our kids are in comparison to what we were when we were kids. Mariam, you're not included in this.
I was an active kid.
No, I'm saying we were more active. But
I thought I was fairly active.
I know.
I get what you mean, though.
Speaking on behalf of-
With time, we've become a lot more sedentary. I mean, it's even the room to play
Yes.
is lacking
Yes.
in a lot of
Yeah.
estates. So you want to go out. Security as well is different.
So many
I could come back
factors.
when it's dark because it's dark, and that's the only reason I'm coming back home from playing. But now you can't just let kids outside.
Exactly.
So I get that.
Yeah.
But continue.
No, so it's just about screening oneself from a young age, even from, it's not in the guidelines, but even from an age of 18, if you encourage the next generation to start saying, okay, get your wellness checks done, make sure your blood sugars, your cholesterols, and your vitamin D and everything are checked at least once in a year, you're encouraging good habits and screening. If it is picked up to be pre-diabetes, you're already explaining to them that the mainstay is a healthy lifestyle. It is not, oh my God, this is a disease, I'm going to live with and die with it. No, it's going to be part of your life. Take it by the horns, live with it. Teach the next generation, even after that, okay, look, I'm living with diabetes. I'm not suffering from diabetes.
Right.
I am doing my exercises, I'm doing my checks, I'm taking my medications where I need to take them. And that's it. It's just becoming part of life, as is everything else.
Which is why the blood sugar testing is important. So again, that's a child, but even me, as Janet, is this something that I could end up, what's an appropriate way to say?
Manifesting it.
Manifesting.
Not manifesting.
Yeah, no, I'm trying not to manifest. But let's say I've been okay. And then, there's factors that could still lead to me becoming a person living with diabetes.
Yes.
That's correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So blood sugar testing would now be able to just show me, which you'll get into. I'm just trying to think, how do I, even in my big age, be careful? Because it may seem like something that a certain demographic gets, or it's younger people can get it more, or people who have access to the most unhealthy foods. But the truth is, anybody can actually get diabetes at any age.
At any age.
Okay.
It's a healthy lifestyle that you have to maintain.
Okay.
That's it. And you may be able to delay it, possibly prevent it, but getting your checks done on time and getting that as part of your annual
Yeah.
wellness, it makes a difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm thinking through from a structural perspective. The world kind of is moving towards, well, the West already had their junk food, processed food phase, and now they're moving into now wellness and organics. And unfortunately for us now, we're kind of moving into our junk food phase, a growing middle class, accessibility like you've mentioned. So what does that mean for diabetes now as a healthcare concern in Africa and in Kenya specifically? Yeah, from the burden, like treating diabetes. Let's get an insight into that.
Okay, so yes, of course, the incidence is going to rise, and the onus is on everyone to get themselves checked from time to time. And of course, it's also important for them to get with healthy lifestyle habits. On the other hand, again, teaching the next generation, empowering the next generation to say, no, you make informed choices. You want to eat this burger today? Eat it. Enjoy it while you are eating it. Don't take it away from your once in a while treat. But the rest of the days, balance it out with better foods. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, but now the burden of treating and the cost of treating diabetes, yes.
So the cost of, again, accessibility to medications in our country, in where we are here in Nairobi, is not too bad. We have access to the best of the best medications. They may not be original molecules that we have access to all the time, but they will be generics that are available. I would say something is better than nothing. You have got to be on treatment, and rather than being on the older therapies that are more accessible, like the older sulfonylureas, like the older medication, is the newer medication, which we do have access to, but at a cost. And it is expensive. And it's not exactly available in all the government institutions. So again, advocating for that is something that a lot of people do from various organizations. And again, making sure that it's accessible is something that we do it at Lions, because we have we have accessibility. That's core for us. But then other organizations are also vouching for the same.
To make sure that this is accessible. When you say newer therapies, do you mean like semaglutides?
Including semaglutide, but there are others. There are SGLT2 inhibitors, your dapagliflozin, your empagliflozin, also not very easily accessible in the government institutions, but they are available. And not only the semaglutide as well as the tirzepatide that has now been recently launched in the country, but yes, including that.
So not to get too technical and lose our viewers, for semaglutides, I think for a lot of people, the name that they will recognize is Ozempic.
Yes.
That's what comes to mind as a diabetes drug, which has also now taken over the world of weight loss in the West especially. And there was a circular put out by the Pharmacy and Poisons Board. But please explain to us these new therapies for treating diabetes, how they operate in Kenya, and where weight loss comes in, and if they are regulated for weight loss in Kenya. That's a lot of questions. Let's start with, yes, the new therapies and how they help treat diabetes.
Okay, so both semaglutide and tirzepatide are both, they're what we call GLP-1 and dual GLP-1 agonists. They are able, what they do is they have various mechanisms. They don't just work on the gut flora and they don't work on the gut hormones. They also work in a neurohormonal manner. That means they work somewhere in the brain, tell the brain, hey, cut down on the eating, reduce your appetite, and all of that. Obesity is now not considered just, oh, you eat too much, you're fat. It is not that anymore. It is a metabolic disorder. It is something that has roots in behavior, it has roots in genetics, it has roots in hormones. So these drugs alter how the hormones work. They also alter how our own inherent insulin works. It decorrupts the police, to speak. And it makes our own insulin work better for us. It slows gastric emptying and therefore making us feel full. So the want to keep on eating, the want to be hungry, the want to, like I'd say sometimes to my daughter, my mouth feels lonely, I want to eat something. That feeling.
My mouth is bored.
I want to eat something. No, the feeling and to acknowledge that and to actually have to fulfill the need is, like in the past, I would say a PWD will come to, I'm hungry all the time. Like, drink water or bite into an apple. You can fool your brain into thinking that you've eaten something and it's healthy. And it wasn't the most right thing to say, but we don't have anything else to say because that time we didn't have semaglutide. This was about maybe 2-3 years ago. But now that we have it, we do offer it up. It is not equitably accessible to everybody. the original molecules are extremely expensive, and not all of them are regulated. At well-known pharmacies as well, I am not sure how they are regulated. But there are generics that we note to be a little bit better regulated, so we are using those in our practice on a regular basis, but not everybody can afford it. These injections are weekly. The tablets are there are orals available as well. They are on a daily basis. It is expensive, but it is something that is now more accessible than it used to be before.
Okay. So this means for people who have been perhaps having to give themselves insulin, this is a much easier way of controlling their insulin resistance, or it's not really insulin itself, but yes, much easier way of controlling the insulin resistance, right?
I would say that what it does is it reduces the need for insulin, does not negate the need of insulin. It may reduce the number of drugs that you are consuming for for diabetes, the oral glucose lowering agents. It may reduce the amount of insulin that you are using for your diabetes management. Now, those who use it only for weight loss, not highly recommended to start on your own. Needed to be given by, a doctor's prescription is necessary. There's a screening process to it. You can't just come up to me and say, I want Ozempic, or I want semaglutide, and I want Mounjaro or tirzepatide. Please prescribe. No, there are risk factors. If you have history of pancreatic disease, illness, thyroid disease, illness in the family, allergies, these are things. And then you do measurements, and there's a process to it. So yes, I'm aware that many people get it off the market. How original these products are, whether the cold chain is maintained.
Right.
I think that's why they're sounding the alarm. But also, what's the risk in terms of the medicine itself, or the semaglutide not being available for the use it's intended to? Because I think part of the concern is, because it's becoming such a lifestyle hype, some people might say, okay, then what happens to those who actually need it? Is that a valid concern, or are we not there yet?
The persons with diabetes
who actually need it.
Those who actually need it will be able to consult with a physician and have access to it with a prescription, ideally. Let them come, we can assist, we can advise and guide accordingly. But those who are not going with prescriptions need to stop doing that, because it can cause, it can harm you more than help you at certain points in time. And that, to some of it, will not work also, because cold chain, right? That's a process.
Cold chain, the storage basically of the medicine, and you don't know if it's, again, unregulated. You don't know where it came from, how they stored it, and all of that.
What the
so risky to just You've brought these. Would you like to walk us through just what you have in front?
That's a good pun.
I didn't
Would you like to walk us through? Yeah, she brought some shoes and
this is
a
salt shaker. Oh, sorry, no. What is it? Oh my God.
I'm never going to see this the same way again.
Is it not?
It's not a salt shaker.
Wow.
What did you say it was?
It's a CGMS. So like we said,
let's learn what a CGMA is.
Okay. So it's a salt shaker and some yogurt.
I thought it was a salt shaker and some yogurt as well.
No.
I am not going to see this ever again.
Let's learn.
The same way. Okay. So as we were talking about the blood sugar testing, we were talking about how we need to do lab tests. And yes, a person living with diabetes also needs to monitor their blood sugar levels on a regular basis at home with a glucometer, which is the most standard. That's the standard of care. We give them a schedule. I tell the shoshas, I'm giving you homework. The next time you come, you have to bring your homework. Otherwise, there's punishment for you. And they'll bring it very nicely, and I love that. So, but the process of pricking and then writing down can get a little tedious, and sometimes people are not compliant with it. This is something that we have.
It's also invasive. It's like I have to prick myself
I
every day.
know.
You know?
Yeah. And then that is true. And also in regards to cost effectiveness, again, accessibility comes when you these are not very accessible to every Kenyan. We are trying to get it there. We will get there someday. Glucometers were not as accessible. They're still not as accessible as we'd like them to be. And I feel like I would love everybody to have a glucometer for you, glucometer for you.
For everybody, yes. Make it rain glucometers. Yeah.
But it's not just the meters. It's the strips that are more expensive and they're less accessible. And then they keep changing, and then the accuracy and all that. This is what we call the continuous glucose monitoring system, CGMS.
Maybe you can hold it up for our viewers to see. Okay. Yes.
Where am I?
Oh, right there.
Okay.
Yes. Number 3. Yeah.
So this is what comes in the box, and basically it's a small sensor chip. We should have prepared this before
It really does look like a Nini of yogurt.
It's something that you can use on your own once you're trained enough to use it. Let me show you the size of the sensor.
Okay.
This is why I don't cook. This is the easiest thing I can do.
Okay.
So I do right there, right?
There you
So
go.
this is the size of the sensor. It goes over the arm,
Okay.
right there, most of the times.
Okay.
And it doesn't hurt. I've used a couple of these. They're very comfortable to have. They stay on for a whole 14 days, and they measure your blood sugar levels every 5 minutes, and it reflects on your phone.
Nice. So it's basically like you have an app on your phone.
Yep.
You put this on your arm, and it just sends like throughout. You get to see your blood sugar levels. Okay.
Okay.
Fantastic.
I can
Does it
spy on you
alert
too.
you?
I can spy on you too.
Oh, your doctor can.
Yes, your doctor can keep an
Fantastic.
eye. If you permit us to,
Yes.
there's consent
With
to
consent. We can spy on you with consent. So it stays on throughout 14 days. You're not removing it and putting it back.
this. No,
Okay.
and most people have been able to swim with it, avoid seawater. But then this is something that goes on. There is a patch that goes on top of it if you'd like for it to be retained for a longer, like for. I mean, sometimes when you're removing your clothes, putting on shirts, etc., you're scared that it'll come off. There's a patch that comes along with it that can make sure that it's a little protected. So this is the CGM. This is something that I would love for most Kenyans to be able to have access to after the glucometer, of course. I am aim high.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, we have challenges, but aim high. We will get there someday, but we need to try to
aim high.
to start doing these things at some point, maybe
Yeah.
10 years, 15 years down the line. This device has been available in the world for more than 20 years. And we are just about getting it. We have had access to it. Certain companies have been coming in, parallel exports and all that stuff. But this is now officially available with us. So it's easier to use, but it's a single-use device. And once you use it for 14 days, you discard it. But then there's another one that we have that can be used recurrently, which can be more economically feasible in the long term. But this is something I encourage most persons living with diabetes, especially those who are on insulin, those who are just beginning to be like they just have diabetes or even pre-diabetes. So I can put this on, and I've observed. I actually put this on my father as well. He is living with diabetes, so it's that I put it on, and I can see that I'm sitting at home, and I'm like, okay, what have you eaten? So it tells you which foods spike your sugars, which foods reduce your are okay with your sugars, which medication. So if you're on insulin, dose adjustments, which we usually do because we see the sugars and then we have to dose adjust the insulin based on what insulin it is, etc. This makes a big difference because there's adherence. Adherence is an issue.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's a big one. I was thinking.
How much does it cost?
Yes, the cost of this.
It ranges between 7 to 10
1,000?
Yes.
For the
For
one
one.
patch.
Yes.
Oh.
And then once you discard it,
So-
you don't need to keep. How often? That's what you're saying.
2
There's one
weeks.
that's
You
more.
said, yeah,
After
2
2 weeks, what happens? Do I
You
have to circle back and get another one?
Yeah, basically.
A month or two later to do the whole thing all over again.
If you can,
15th
if
day.
your insurance will cover it, calling out to insurance guys, if your insurance will cover it,
Yeah.
and if you can continuously use it, it reduces. It has been shown to reduce the risk of complications.
Yeah.
So,
7
and
to 10,000.
hospitalization. Sorry.
No, continue. And hospitalization.
And hospitalization. So yes, if you're looking at it as if it is affordable, this is what I was talking about when it comes to equitable access. It's not accessible to everybody. Yes, but then it's if one cannot afford it, doing it intermittently still gives you the idea as to what's going on. So it really is on you. So the days that you stop doing this, you will go back to your glucometer pricks and you'll observe your sugars on the glucometer. It is not an absolute must. I can't say, no, you must use it. Otherwise, it's not possible. No. As far as you're monitoring your blood sugars, this is one of the better options. And
Right.
if it's feasible, well and good. If it's not, then glucometers are absolute musts.
Okay. I'm thinking of when I see the shoes, I think of some of the complications that result from diabetes advanced. I don't know if that's why you brought the shoes, but also speak to, yes, what Diabetes Unchecked can do so that as we call for more people to get screenings and to monitor their blood sugar, that we know what we're preventing exactly.
Okay, so like when you talk about complications, you get head-to-toe complications. You get eye complications when there's retina-related problems in the back of the eye. Screen for those. So a person living with diabetes needs to do these screening tests at least once in a year. They check the back of their eyes with an ophthalmologist, and if there are problems, there is treatment for it. If you leave it without treatment, then it could lead to blindness, right? There are heart-related problems, stroke-related complications, kidney, liver, not something that's very commonly spoken about. Again, what we do at Lions is we do a head-to-toe screening, wherein we involve the liver disease screening as well, metabolism-associated steatohepatitis or fatty liver disease, something that's also something that's been commonly talked about. We do screen.
We do hear about at least fatty liver disease,
Yeah, so we have a screening for that. We have a screening equipment for that. It's called the VCTE. It picks up liver-related issues. It's a screening to tell you, okay, at this point in time, look, we understand that your diabetes is high and this is leading to this much fatty liver disease. Can you please work on it? Everybody's going to work on numbers. You need proof. You can allude to anything in a broader sense. But if you have a number on a paper and you say, okay, Dr. has shown me this. Can I get this changed? Can I improve it? And then once they get better with their lifestyle management and then you show them that they've improved, that makes a big difference. So the FibroScan is something that we do. We do kidney screening and then the feet. That's my favorite part.
Yes.
I like
actually a
feet.
foot expert. What's the word?
Podiatrist? Well, that's different.
Her specialty is very different. Please tell us.
I'm interested in diabetes-related foot complications, and we work as a multidisciplinary clinic. I have a podiatrist on board with me. I have 2 wound care nurses, and we liaise with vascular surgeons, podiatric surgeons, as well as orthopedic surgeons and general surgeons for our care. My nutritionist is on board with me, so it's a day-to-day process. The foot is attached to the whole human being, just as I say the eye is attached to the whole human being. And we have to look at someone holistically, not just, oh, you have a foot problem, and that's all I'm going to see. No.
Right.
So the nutrition goes hand in hand with the eye screening, that goes hand in hand with diabetes management, infection, etc. So persons living with diabetes, at least each have 25% chance of developing a foot-related complication. Most of them are wounds that are non-healing. If not managed correctly, need go on to requiring an amputation. 80% of these amputations are preventable with the right management and the right education. Footwear is important. We all like to wear our fancy shoes. I'm not showing you my shoes today. I'm not wearing the shoes. But talking to your healthcare provider about what kind of footwear, again, the onus is not only on the healthcare provider, it's also on the individual living with diabetes. Doc, can you see my feet, please? As an individual living with diabetes, if I were someone living with diabetes, I need to look at my foot before I sleep every day, look between the toes. Any changes, I should go to my healthcare provider. No bathroom surgery. No, you see a boil, you scratch. No, poke it with a safety pin. No, go to the doc, see what can be done in a more conservative manner instead of complicating.
You say non-healing, so these are wounds that come, like for example, like a boil, and then you poke it and it just refuses to heal, or how does that?
That, or this trauma. Mom is working in the shamba. She's not worn the right footwear. She's been injured by a twig, and she's like, yeah, this is going to be kawaida. It's going to be okay. And then 2 weeks later, you see the foot is swollen, and she's like, okay, I'll go to a local dispensary, or I'll just go to the pharmacy and I'll just pick up some medications, and they may not be adequate. And then it turns into a full-fledged wound. Some of the wounds that develop are on the plantar surface or on the undersurface of the foot. And so therefore, for example, offloading is not a very commonly known concept, filling up this gap with training programs and all that we do, but this is also important. If there's a wound in the back of the foot, you're not supposed to step there. The pressure, if I have a wound here and if I keep on pinching it, like we do our pimples.
You make it worse.
You make it worse, right? So it's the same thing. So if you have a wound at the back of your foot, and if you take off the pressure,
maybe just show us the back of the shoe so we can see, right, like this way, to this camera. Okay. So like that.
So
as a platform.
Yes. I like that you know that term.
It's a platform.
It's a wedge, yes.
It's a wedge.
All right.
Okay.
So the pressure of the foot will go predominantly on this side and less on this side, and therefore the this area will be offloaded and the wound will heal faster.
Okay.
So that's when you have a wound on the heel.
Yes.
So does this keep moving depending on where the wound is?
Right, if it's at the front of the foot.
We have bespoke footwear for all of that.
Okay.
It makes
Okay.
a difference, and if not, then and another important thing is even if there's no wound, I think footwear is an extremely important aspect of a person living with diabetes. Having front straps, middle straps, and the back counter makes a big difference because a lot of persons living with long-standing diabetes have nerve damage. When Safaricom or Airtel,
yes.
Airtel is down, we can't communicate with each other. So if something happens to me, how will Eric find out? It's through the telephone lines. It's the same way. With nerve damage, the communication lines are down.
Right.
Less healing. So and I'll hit myself and Eric won't know. Eric's the brain and I'm the foot. Eric won't know.
Yeah.
I won't feel pain.
There's no communication.
So having good footwear, make sure protection, make sure that there's less likelihood of there being wounds. And then you observing your foot, make sure that you pick up wounds earlier, any redness, any darkish discoloration. Yes, we have dark skin, but there is a change that happens, a change in the nature of skin that happens that you must pick up. Of late, there has been even a guideline for dark skin tone management in diabetes foot, which is an absolute necessity. We've been learning about redness in the skin and all that.
Right.
Where are we going to see redness in our skin?
Yeah.
It's not always possible. So
Yeah.
there's actually a guideline on it. So,
What are the signs and symptoms that somebody has diabetes?
okay, that's a good question. Sometimes there are no signs and symptoms. That's where wellness checks come in. But most of the times, blurry vision, come and see us. Get your sugars checked. Frequent urination, waking up in the middle of the night to urinate, frequent infections, tingling and numbness in the feet, the feeling of tiredness all the time. Could just be menopause.
I was just going to say that feels like perimenopause. I was going to be like tick, tick, tick.
So then you can't tell me then. That's why you go to
That's
the
why you
doctor.
get the blood sugar
Yes.
test. Okay.
Your best bet is getting a 3-month blood sugar average check and not just a fasting blood sugar. I feel like it is guideline based to be more accurate to do an HbA1c or a 3-month blood sugar average than just do a fasting blood sugar or a random blood sugar. It's like your kids go to school, you at the end of the term you have an exam. So you need them to see whether they've answered a question nicely. I told me like, yeah, he's ready for the exams. And they come back with like not so good grades. So then
Okay, so then let's do the average, like the
That's
3-month
helpful.
average.
Yeah.
I'm thinking from a policy perspective, is there anything being done from the ministry and even county governments, as far as you know, to specifically deal with diabetes, whether it's having the CHPs do blood sugar tests, anything that you know that's happening from that level? I'm wondering from a national perspective, because non-communicable diseases are becoming more of a burden to our healthcare system as well. So I'm wondering if there's any intentionality on their part. Yeah.
Yes, screening has improved significantly over the past few years, and blood sugar levels are checked regularly. Even the accessibility of some centers to get the 3-month blood sugar average being done at their centers has improved. So there is some movement, but more can be done.
Okay. Okay. I think community health promoters would be a really good place to start. Yeah. They should be able to check. Predisposition, you've spoken to it, and lifestyle as well. When and it's kind of Janet's question, but when do you know it's time to check, and before the blurry vision sets in, before
If you have risk factors like obesity, a first-degree relative, I would even recommend that you check from the age of 30, 35 and above. But for sure, from 40 and above, guidelines dictate that you must check your 3-month blood sugar average, your cholesterol levels, vitamin D, overall health checkup, even an ECG. Get it out of the way as a wellness. And then after that, you do it yearly once before and then if the symptoms come in is when you proactively go check. Otherwise, you can be reactive about it. Like if you have the symptoms, you can. Otherwise, annually once.
So once someone has tested positive for diabetes, then what?
Most of the times, it depends on the level of the HbA1c. But at all levels, making sure that lifestyle management is the key pillar is the most important. You can tell, if I'm diagnosed, you can tell me to take medication, but if I don't manage my lifestyle well, the medication is not going to work as it should. Diabetes is like a 4-legged chair. Lifestyle, taking medications correctly, doing your doctor's checkups, and exercising have to go hand in hand. Otherwise, there's an imbalance. You can't sit on a chair which is imbalanced. So that's
With
the
the
way
three
you
legs.
Yeah.
have to-
Some people have said that if you do all those things, at some point, actually, the diabetes can actually recede. Is it true?
The word is remission. That is
Remission.
the accepted global term. It is not reversal. It's diabetes, pushing diabetes into remission. When we're able to reduce the number of medications and still maintain a target HbA1c, is when we can say, okay, for 3 months that, okay, we have put diabetes in remission. Yes, there are people for whom we have started insulin because the blood sugars were very high, but with the right education and empowerment, and sometimes even with semaglutide and tirzepatide, we've been able to push people into remission. So it is possible, but not in everybody, and it's not magic. It takes work from an individual's side to make sure that lifestyle management.
Yeah. What's the one Kenyan, or one myth that you think Kenyan families or Kenyans think about diabetes that you wish they could unlearn?
Diabetes doesn't happen to us. We are too young to get diabetes. When I see 10-year-olds, 15-year-olds with diabetes, and you're like, but the parents are like, no, it's not possible. This could be type 1 diabetes, could be type 2. I've seen kids who have developed type 1 diabetes, but it is a cultural belief that there's a curse, and they're not taken for treatment. And for long times, these kids go through a lot of problems, and alternate therapy rather than the insulin that they need, require hospitalizations, develop complications that are really needless. They're avoidable, not needless. They're avoidable.
Okay.
Better put.
Because we're approaching the end of the conversation, the link between obesity and diabetes, you've spoken to it as a predisposition, but what exactly is the link? And is that why then the same compounds that are used to treat diabetes are then used for weight loss?
Yes, the more obese a person is, the more inflammation and insulin resistant this individual is. Also, it goes hand in hand. The more insulin resistance means the higher the blood sugar levels, because the insulin is not doing its job.
Okay.
The minute obesity is tackled, it's weight management for health, not weight management for appearance. That is our angle. It doesn't have anything to do with appearance. It has entirely to do with health of an individual. The minute the weight is managed and your waist to hip ratio reduces, and I can't, health improves, right? We can even say, oh, my weight is not going down, and I'm using weights, I'm weight training. You might be gaining muscle and losing the fat. So yes, measurements of upper arm, mid-thigh, waist to hip, these are all important measurements. This is why it's important, even as you go on therapy like tirzepatide, semaglutide, you need a doctor's guidance to go hand in hand to be able to guide you through.
There's a common misconception. If you're thin, you can't
be obese.
Yeah, you can't be not obese, but if you're thin, you can't have high cholesterol or high blood. Like we associate leanness with health, and obesity or just being bigger with not being healthy. And I don't know, sometimes that's not always true. How do we dispel that? Because there's people who may be bigger than you, but they're way fitter. There's people who could be lean,
but they're very unhealthy.
But they're unhealthy. Yeah,
we have a lot of research to do on that, and that's where the whole type 5 diabetes comes in. There are people who are called lean obese people. In that, again, this is a South Asian population. They're physically, they look very lean. Example. But my midsection, my torso, will have a lot of fat around my organs. That is the obesity that now predisposes significantly to insulin resistance and therefore development of diabetes, dyslipidemia, and metabolism-related liver disease, etc.
Okay.
So it goes all hand in hand. So I might look lean,
but you're not healthy. We need another diabetes clinic, because somebody here is asking about erectile dysfunction.
Oh, as a result
and
of
they've tied
diabetes?
it in, but I know we're at time. Yeah, he's saying, is it true that diabetes can bring erectile dysfunction, or is it the side effect of drugs administered to manage the same?
In 30 seconds?
Yes, it's not just erectile dysfunction. There's female sexual dysfunction that is also present. So yes, both sexes will experience a decreased libido because of nerve-related disease as well as vascular-related disease in diabetes. There is help. It's not because of the medication. It's because of uncontrolled diabetes.
All right. Part 2 loading. This was so important, and people to send in their questions.
Right.
But thank you so much, Dr. Ari, for coming to our Wakilis today. We had a Wakili and a
and the senator.
And a senator.
Former senator.
Former senator, yes.
Current deputy party.
Yeah,
Hi.
exactly.
Deputy King.
Deputy King. Vibe Shift is next on Nation FM.
They are hosting Miss Kathinji, a journalist.
All right.
nice.
She's coming up next.
And Your World as well is
And
coming
Your
up.
World is rooted in wellness, healing foods from the ground up.
Healing foods from the ground up.
Yep,
That's
they have
a
an
perfect
organic farmer,
continuation.
Jogona Wangonyo, who's going to join, a wellness coach, Susan War, and dietitian Lillian Mumina.
Oh,
That's
such a nice
fantastic.
follow-up.
It
You
is.
should stay on for that one.
Right?
I listen.
All right. Thank you so much for staying with Fixing the Nation, one conversation at a time. We'll be back here tomorrow morning at 6 a.m.